Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the absolutely senseless murder of 13-year-old Lauren Landavaso. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Alright, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that absolutely broke my heart, and it's on a case that I had never heard of before. I actually learned about Lauren's case because of an episode of a show called Murdered at First Sight, I believe is the name of it, and basically YouTube recommended me an episode of this, and I saw Lauren's face, and something about her made me want to click it, so I did, and I watched it. And to hear Lauren's parents talk about her, and to hear about the effect her death had on the community, and how absolutely senseless this was, because it was senseless, okay? And how horrifying it was. It was a lot. This case was a lot to read about. So many people were affected, and so many children were scarred at the fact that they witnessed a public murder of a 13-year-old child. I couldn't believe it happened. I couldn't believe that I'd never heard about it, and I couldn't get Lauren's face out of my head. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details, but of course I want you to answer the question once you have something to go on, right? Information to answer question with. And the question of the day is this. Well, there's two. Do you believe that Lauren's murderer was given the right sentence, the amount of time they were given? And the second question is, which of their several reasons for this murder do you believe is the actual reason for why they did what they did? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the tragic and senseless murder of 13-year-old Lauren Landavaso. Our story today begins on September 2nd, 2016, and on this day, police were responding to calls of shots fired that led them to the 5100 block of Kingston Avenue, and this was in Wichita Falls, Texas. When officers arrived at the scene, it was absolute chaos. People were running, people were screaming, people were crying, and this is because two 13-year-old girls had been shot in the street. These girls had literally been walking home from their first week of 8th grade when somebody pulled up in a car, looked at the girls, pulled out a rifle, and shot at them over and over. Now, one of these girls did survive. Her name was Michaela, and she was able to run. But soon after running, she realized that her friend that she had been walking with was not with her. So she tried to go back and look for her, but realized that she couldn't walk anymore due to her injuries, so she sat down beside a dumpster. And when she looked out, she saw a pair of still feet. And these feet belonged to 13-year-old Lauren Landavaso. Michaela called out to Lauren over and over, but got no response. And Lauren's mother, Bianca, upon learning that shots had been fired and her daughter wasn't home from school yet, took off running to the scene. And when she got there, she too saw Lauren lying there on the ground, not moving. She saw her daughter's eyes looking towards her, and she yelled her name. She called out to Lauren over and over, and she too got no response. Lauren had been killed for absolutely no reason, and one of the most tragic and senseless murders I think I've ever read about. But before we talk about that, before we talk about exactly what happened that day, the trial, and who did this to her, I first want to talk about the girl that the world lost that day. I want to tell you everything I could find about Lauren. Lauren Landavaso was a miracle baby girl who was born to her parents Bianca and Vern, and she was born on October 14th, 2002 in Wichita Falls, Texas. She was their only daughter. She did have two older brothers because she was born a little bit later in life, right? So she had two older brothers who were 10 to 15 years older than her. So when Lauren was born, you know, all these years later, and their only daughter, their one baby girl, she was definitely a little bit of a surprise, but she also wasn't a little bit of a surprise. Let me explain that. Bianca, Lauren's mother, said she knew for a while before having Lauren that she was going to have a daughter. She said that she had had a very vivid dream in her life where she saw it sort of like through, she described it as like an old-timey, video camera recorder, right? With like the crank and it's like, you know, got the fuzzies on the edge. And she said in this video, she just saw a little girl. It was a little girl with a bob and these big blue eyes that she didn't know, she didn't recognize, but somehow this little girl seemed familiar to her. In the dream, the little girl walked up to Vern, which is Bianca's husband, and she went up to him and she tugged on his pant leg and she looked up at him and said, "Daddy." And that's when the dream ended and Bianca woke up. But she said from that moment, she knew that that little girl was their daughter. And then they went on to have her. And when she was born, her father, Vern, just had to kind of spend a couple extra minutes just looking into her eyes. And he said he was immediately in love. He said he was in disbelief that they had finally had the daughter they'd always wanted. He said of meeting his baby girl, and I quote, "From the moment I held her, she was my Pooh Bear. We were happy. We were living the dream." He said that there was no offense to his sons, but there is just a special different kind of love between a father and his daughter, and that he felt like he had been waiting for this his entire life. And man, she was so loved. She was this happy baby, a happy child, a silly child. She loved to make her parents laugh, so she'd go out of her ways to like do things that would elicit that response. You know, like she would dress up in these wild little outfits or do some crazy makeup and then come out and give them like a little fashion show. And her mother said that this was incredibly effective too, that sometimes her stomach would hurt from laughing so much at her child. Lauren was the type of person who would not let you be sad around her. It was impossible, no matter what. If you were sad and she was there, she would do everything in her power to cheer you up. Lauren was said to be fun, random, and unpredictable, and this is something that her mother loved about her. And her grandparents too, her grandfather said that she was very lively, very funny, that she had this magic about her from as little as her being a toddler. I know that's not good English, but even from when she was a toddler, she had this magic about her and she could just keep a person on their toes. Lauren was the type of girl who was so friendly. She just like knew everyone. You know those people that just know everyone? Anytime her mom and her would go anywhere, she would run into someone that Lauren knew and her mom would be like, "Okay, like how do you know this person?" And Lauren's father said of her and this, and I quote, "She was a social butterfly. She must have known that she had a limited amount of time and she squeezed everything in." And that's the sense you get from anybody that truly knew her. And because Lauren was a social butterfly, she was one of the most popular girls in school. And not because she led in like a mean way. We've talked about this before, the Courtney Shanes versus the Elizabeth Purrs, right? She was cool and she was popular because she was kind, because she went out of her way to make people feel heard and seen, and she made people feel like she was really their friend. And man, she just sounded to be very empathetic and progressive and rad, and she was only 13 years old and she already had those qualities that just made people be drawn to her. Her mother, Bianca, said that Lauren was one of the most caring and compassionate people that she had ever met. And Lauren was the type of friend that all of her friends would run to if she needed help. She was, as her father said, quote, "cooler than penguins' feet." He also said that if the world was full of Laurens, there would be no problems. You wouldn't need laws. You wouldn't need guns. He said she was just pure love, and that's what she'll be remembered for. Her ability to bring a smile to your face no matter what. And both he and Bianca believed that if she had lived, she would 100% be helping people. They just know that she would have done good. But she didn't get that chance because she was literally shot down in the street by some obsessed loser, honestly, for lack of a better word, after reading everything about what happened with him and who he was and what he did and the fact that he has no remorse. That is the only word that I personally have for him. It's just so sad, man. She was this young girl. She finished her school day. She was going to walk home. She was going to visit her boyfriend real quick. And she was about to start her weekend, right? In an area that her family lived because they knew it was a good place to raise kids, a place that they believed was safe. The last time Vern saw his daughter was the Thursday night before she was killed. It was the end of the night. He went in, he kissed her on the head, he told her goodnight, and that was the last time he saw her because the following morning, the day that she was killed, Vern left for work before Bianca would leave, before Lauren would leave. So it was just Lauren and Bianca in the morning, and they were kind of running late, you know, gotten a little bit of a late start in the morning. So Bianca kind of rushed her out the door because the person who was driving her to school was waiting, and she told her, like, hurry up, you know, I love you, be safe, gave her a kiss, and that was it. And then Bianca left for the day too. And it was a good day, you know? The weather was good. They remember this. The weather was good. Everybody was in a good mood. Bianca cried when she remembered this because she said that day she even took a selfie that she posted to Facebook where she put a caption with it talking about how life was good. And it ended up being the worst day of her life. So that day was a Friday, and it was the first week of the school year, Lauren's first week in 8th grade at McNeil Junior High School. She's just this little thing, fresh mouth of braces. Her and her friend Michaela, among other children, had finished school, and they were walking home down through like an alleyway. It's called an alleyway, but it doesn't look the way I picture an alleyway from like where I used to walk growing up. It looks like a nicer area, but they're walking down an alleyway. I think a couple other friends are with them. Like, it's okay. Lauren and Michaela, a couple of their friends, some other kids that didn't really know them, they're walking, they're doing their own thing. They're all walking down together. And Lauren and Michaela are just talking about, you know, teenage girl things. They're talking about boys. They're talking about their plans for the weekend, the fact that they didn't have any classes together this week. Normal teenage girl things. So they're walking, and as they're about to get to the end of this alley where they're gonna, you know, go separate ways, a car pulls up and the driver's side window is facing them, and it just stops there. And all of the kids kind of stop there too because they're not sure what's going on. Meanwhile, back at home, back at Lauren's home, her parents are there. Bianca is kind of waiting and expecting Lauren to get home. It's about 3:30. Lauren should be back any time. And that's when someone pulls into Bianca and Vern's yard. And it's not Lauren, obviously. Somebody pulls in, and it's one of Bianca's friends. She, you know, goes out, or she was already out. It wasn't clear. But the friend just like yells frantically, like, is Lauren home? And Bianca's kind of taken aback by this energy. She wasn't really expecting that. So she's like, you know, no, why? And this friend responded to her, quote, kids are down. And that's all she said to her. So Bianca runs back inside and just tells Vern, quote, kids are down. She didn't have it in her to explain, to wait, nothing. And then she takes off out of the house, down the street, running to where the kids would be. Vern's super confused. He doesn't know what's going on. So he gets in his truck and he like follows in that direction. Again, having no idea what's going on. He, like Bianca, just hears the words, kids are down, and he leaves too. So they get to the scene and it's chaos. As I described in the beginning, there's people everywhere, there's crime scene tape everywhere, and they have no idea what's going on. Vern thinks maybe a kid got hit by a car or something. They don't know at this point that there's been a shooting. But then Bianca was able to get close enough to see, and what she sees is her own child laying there on her back on the ground with no one working on her. She said that Lauren's head was pointed in a way that she was staring straight at her mother, but she said Lauren wasn't there anymore. And so she just started to scream, man. She got hysterical. She started screaming. She was yelling over and over, like, that's my daughter. And her scream was so powerful that years later, the first responding officer said of her screams, quote, it just sends chills down my spine every time. It's a parent grieving for the loss of their child. I'm a parent. So meanwhile, Vern is driving over, right? He's driving, she had ran over. So he's driving over to meet up with his wife. And all the while driving over, he thinks to himself, like, this can't be my kid. There's like 1,000 kids at this school. It has nothing to do with Lauren. But on the way, he took out his phone and he called his daughter's cell phone. And someone picked it up. And on the other line, all he could hear was screaming, having no idea that the screams that he's hearing are the screams of his wife, like discovering their child not alive anymore. And he said as soon as he heard those screams, though, he kind of went into shock and he felt like there was a white fog over him. Bianca said that the reason that she kept yelling is because she wanted her daughter to come back. She said that she knew her daughter was going towards the light and she just wanted to get her to come back to them. So she said to her daughter over and over, quote, don't go, please come back. Bianca was also yelling to anyone, everyone, like, what happened, what happened? And finally, she doesn't know who it was, but somebody told her, like, she was shot. Your daughter was shot. And it was at that moment that she lost it. She dropped to her knees. She couldn't compose herself at all. And people were trying to hold her up and help her, but all she remembers of that moment is not being able to get to her baby. Vern has said that this was the first day that he and his wife woke up to a nightmare, and they've been waking up to the same nightmare ever since. He said that when he lost his daughter, nothing mattered. Work, money, life, nothing mattered to him anymore. And this nightmare exists all because somebody pulled up on these two little girls walking home from school, okay, looked out the window, pulled out a rifle, and shot over and over at them. Lauren was hit 15 times, with several of those shots being fatal, before this person took off and left these girls for dead. And this was done with an audience, you know, there were kids everywhere who saw this happen. Now, when Lauren was put into the ambulance, her father was able to go along with her, and he just remembers turning around and looking to her and telling her, like, hold on, please hold on, it's going to be okay, please hold on. And he said that's the first time he noticed that there was blood in her hair. At the scene, he hadn't seen it for whatever reason. You know, your body's in shock, there's a lot of reasons why. So he hadn't noticed it, but now he had, and he just remembers thinking to himself, like, blood in her hair, that can't be good. But he also remembers that during this drive, he heard an EMT professional say that she had a pulse. So when he got to the hospital, he had some hope that she would be okay. But when he got to the hospital, he was taken to this like family room with Bianca. And as soon as they were together, she said, like, Lauren didn't make it. And he was like, you know, no, don't say that. You don't know that that's true. They got a heartbeat. She might be okay. And Bianca was like, look at the room we're in. She didn't make it. This is for us to receive bad news. And it didn't take long for her to be proven correct, because Bianca and Vern were in that room. A group of doctors came in and they told them that their daughter hadn't made it, that their 13-year-old child had been killed. Now, meanwhile, elsewhere in the hospital, Lauren's friend Michaela is being worked on, because remember, Lauren wasn't the only person shot, and Michaela's family was there as well, and it was horrible for them. Like, her mother, Shamika, said that this whole situation, like, traumatized the shit out of her, which how could it not? Because from the scene, like, okay, Michaela got shot, and she called her mother, and her mother answers the phone to her daughter being like, me and Lauren have been shot. So she drives over to the scene, she looks for her kid, she can't find her kid, which I can only imagine what that would have felt like, but she was able to find her, and she ended up rushing over to the hospital to meet with her, to be with her daughter. And she said that when she got there, she saw Vern and Bianca being led into that family room. She said she had been in one room waiting to learn the fate of her own child, and that somebody had come in and tried to like move her or was going to move her from the room she was in to another room to be with her husband. And she said she was scared. She was scared to go because she was scared about what they were going to tell her about her child. And what's really sad here is she said that as she was being led from the room she was in to the new room, she had to walk by the room that Vern and Bianca had been in. And she said of this, quote, "We passed by the first family room, and I hear Bianca scream. And by the way she screamed, I knew Lauren was gone." So then Shamika ended up having to go in and tell her own child, who thankfully survived, that her best friend had been killed, which I can't even imagine what that was like for everyone involved. I can't imagine how terrible Michaela felt knowing that she lived and her friend died. I don't have any real tangible gauge on what survivor's guilt feels like. I've been close to something like that, as you guys know, but not to this extent. And Michaela's response to this is just so heartbreaking, because she was like, why? Like, why Lauren? She was such a good person. It should have been me. I just feel so badly for this girl, because she was worried about Lauren the whole time. After she had been shot, she went back to try to find her. When she was being like worked on and stuff, like at the scene, she kept asking people like, where was she? But she couldn't get a response from anybody. Nobody would answer her. Nobody would tell her if her friend was going to the hospital too. And she just remembers when she was being loaded on a gurney, she saw Lauren there covered up with a white sheet. And even then she kept thinking to herself, like, I hope she makes it. I hope she survives. And now she had found out that she hadn't. But thankfully, Michaela had survived. And because of this, she was able to actually help give a description of the man who did this to them to the police, because she had seen this guy's eyes. She had looked him in the eyes. So she told police that this was a younger white guy who had shaggy brown hair and a bigger nose. So now police at least had something to go on and something they could release to the media. This shooting dude, this was one of the first instances that the mayor of this town or city remembered the community really, really banding together. It didn't matter who you were, what you believed, anything like that, because everyone was invested in this, because 2 children were shot and the killer was still on the loose. Several businesses and community members got together to try to raise money for both families during this time. Crime Stoppers offered up a reward of $9,000 for information, and the area where the girls had been shot became like a shrine to Lauren. There were, purple flowers, balloons, stuffed animals. There was a little like Pooh Bear thing, because I believe that we know that that's a thing with her family, because her father called her Pooh Bear, and he was seen in court later wearing like a little Pooh Bear pin. And then it had this little plaque that had the dates 2002 to 2016, which is just such a short amount of time. And Lauren's friends, man, they came out for Bianca and Vern. Despite the fact that this is a truly life-changing thing to happen to a young person, to be this close to something this traumatic during your formative years, it changes you. It can change you, rather. It can end a season of you, is the best way that I can put it. And despite going through that, they were there for Lauren's parents, and so were their parents. They were there for them, and they told them stories about how fantastic their daughter was. One woman told them that her son was a transfer to Lauren's school and was super nervous, as any kid, any person would be, and he was particularly nervous about lunch because he's like, where do you sit? With whom do you sit? So that day he went in and he just sat by himself, and within minutes Lauren was there introducing herself and offering for this boy to sit with her. And Lauren's dad has said that these are the types of stories that make him cry, because like, what 8th grader does that? What 8th grader is that kind? And her parents said that they didn't even have to teach this to her. It was just inherent in her to be a good person. And now for them to be hearing stories after she's gone about just how fantastic she was, things that they never knew before, things that she didn't tell them about, she didn't brag about, this just was her, it fills them with pride. Which I can only imagine had to be a welcomed reprieve from the crushing sadness that was them going about their lives without Lauren in their lives, you know. Vern said that the day that they left the hospital without her, he just went into her room and laid in her bed in this messy, you know, little teenage girl's room and just cried. Because like, truly, what else can you do? Now that I'm a parent, I'm just like, when I tell you, I can't even imagine being in that position. It is just incredibly traumatizing, and was at that point. I can only imagine just how big that red ball of grief was inside of them. And it's not like they didn't have people, because they were wrapped in family, you know. Like Lauren's grandparents, as soon as they heard what happened, they immediately like headed from their home in Utah to be with them in Texas. I guess they like got in their car, they drove all the way to South Carolina? No, New Mexico, Albuquerque. They drove to New Mexico, is what I'm trying to say, picked up other family members, and then went all the way straight to Bianca and Vern. I believe they were there by Saturday. So she was killed on Friday afternoon, and by Saturday the family was there to be there for Bianca and Vern. They just couldn't believe this happened. It's not like they lived in a bad area or Lauren hung around bad people. They just realized that there were people who would just commit evil acts without any sort of remorse and at random. And that is such a terrifying thought. And it was crushing for them to hear. Like her uncle said that the day he got the call that this happened to Lauren was like one of the worst calls he'd ever gotten in his life. Lauren's funeral took place less than a week later at a local church where Lauren went to, like an after-school program. And her family was touched by the number of people who came to show their support. They even had to hold the service in the church's worship center because there were just so many people. Lauren's middle school even canceled all of like the afternoon programs that would normally happen because they wanted to make sure that every child could be there if they wanted to be there. They said that this was a community-wide event that was vital towards the healing process for the community. The assistant pastor said of Lauren and Lauren's family, and I quote, "I was thinking about her on the way into work this morning, how she should be going to school right now, and she's not. We can't fix what's happened, but we can do things to help make the family's lives easier." And her family, man, they just seem like such amazing people and so deserving of all the help they got. And they got a ton. People wanted to help this family. A GoFundMe page was set up that within hours, I think, or maybe just days, I can't remember exactly, within a very short amount of time, had already reached and exceeded its goals. And they got so much support that her family spoke out and was like, listen, you guys have given so much to us. I don't want you to give to us anymore. If you feel compelled to give in Lauren's name, donate to your favorite charity in her honor so her name lives on. And they said that Lauren, you know, loved animals, particularly the 13-year-old girl. She loved cats. And so they hoped that people would donate to animal rescues in their daughter's name. They also continue to celebrate their daughter. They do this I'm sure that they do this every day in general, but they do it passionately on September 2nd every year, the day that she lost her life. And they encourage others to do the same. They encourage others to be the good change in the world that we need to see and to spend that day trying to do acts of kindness. At the school where she had just started 8th grade, a memorial horse statue was put up for her and Michaela. It's black and it has words painted on it like love, laugh, unique, smile, and Michaela helped paint these words. The horse had the girls' favorite colors on it, which were blue and purple, and it had, little animals, a cat and a dog. And I guess when it was unveiled, Michaela got up there and gave a speech, as did her father, who is a pastor, and he blessed the horse. On the horse, it has a sign that says, quote, "In loving memory of Lauren T. Landavaso," end quote, and it has a rose, and at the bottom it says, quote, "Do not climb on horse, because kids." And you know what about this horse? I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I read this. But in 2020, some dickheads went to this horse, cut it off like at the feet, at the base, and stole it. And stole this horse, dedicated to a girl who was murdered. Oh my God, Lauren's father said that this was heartbreaking, that this was devastating, but that he was going to try to live like they wanted Lauren to live and like Lauren did live, and have compassion and kindness and try to have understanding towards the people who came in the early morning hours and stole their daughter's memorial horse. But these assholes, I'm sorry, but that's what you are if you do something like this. They were caught on video. So they were quickly caught. And one of the people, by the way, was a 19-year-old named Zachary. And he ended up serving 2 years in jail for this because it was a felony to steal this horse. Now, Lauren's parents didn't necessarily want these guys to go to jail. They wanted them to have the opportunity to change their behavior. So they actually asked that probation be recommended for them. And the judge agreed. The judge gave this guy a 2-year suspended sentence and just gave him probation. Right, Zachary? But within months, he had already gotten in trouble again, and so he had to go in and serve his time. So that's what happened with him. And in May of 2021, a new forever horse was put up to replace the one that was, cut off its base. And as far as I know, it still stands today. Oh, and in addition to the horse statue, there was another statue that was erected after Lauren's murder. This statue was erected for, all children who are lost too soon, but it was inspired by Lauren. This is the Angel of Hope. That's the name of the statue. And the group that brought this statue said that they hope it can be a place where people can go for healing. There was an unveiling ceremony, and at the end, white roses were given out to those who had lost somebody, and many people put their roses on and around the memorial statue. Oh, and another thing that was done for Lauren that I thought was just unique and sweet is there's this place called Burke Burnett. It's like a city that's 20 minutes away, or a town. I never know the difference between a city and a town. This area that's 20 minutes away from where Lauren lived, and they do this thing, the kids and adults in the city do this rock hiding thing or rock hunting thing, which sounds so random, but basically what they do is they have decorative rocks that they hide around the city, and people find them, take a picture like I found it, and then hide it in a new place, and it's a thing that they do. So somebody from that area painted one for Lauren. It's purple and it has her name on it, and they hide it around the city so that people can, experience joy and remember her whenever they find this rock. I wanted to tell you guys all of that stuff about Lauren because I just feel like it shows, I feel like the impact on people's lives that Lauren's death had and just how much people came out for her. Shows what an amazing person she was at her young age, and shows how horrifying losing her must have been. I remember, I think for a year or even maybe longer after she was killed, people were still wearing purple shirts and purple bracelets for her. And then I can only imagine in the early days of her being killed, not having any idea who did this to her, how just horrifying this must have been for everyone. So with all that, let's get into the investigation. So in the early days of the investigation, all of the investigation, well, not all the investigation, a lot of what we're going to talk about was in the early days. But one of the first things they did is they went to Lauren's house and they took, her computer, basically any electronics that she could have used to communicate with anyone, because they wanted to see if maybe this killer was somehow related to her, if she knew this person, because they were truly at a loss as to who might have done this. Okay, they were at such a loss. This makes me so mad that one investigator told Bianca, I'm going to be honest with you, but there's a chance that we're never going to find who did this to your child, which is quite a statement to make, might I say, especially because this was just days after she was killed, right? How about we have a little faith, wait a little bit, give it a little bit of time before you're telling a mother who lost their child that, we might never find this person. Talk about traumatizing. And speaking of trauma, police also had to interview a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds who witnessed something that no one should ever have to witness, especially not kids. But they did what they could, and they were able to get some information. So they were able to get a vehicle description. They were actually able to get 2 vehicle descriptions, one of which was a black truck and one of which was like a gold SUV, which are very different vehicles, I will say, but at least it was something. And it did seem like police were definitely focusing more on the gold vehicle anyways, because it was reported that police were searching for an, quote, early 2000s model GMC or Chevrolet champagne/gold colored SUV that was seen in the area, end quote. That was a very wordy quote. As it could be argued most quotes are. So they had this vehicle they were going to be on the lookout for. And in addition to that, Michaela had survived and she had seen who did this to her. So they were toying with the idea and had eventually agreed to letting Michaela sit down with a sketch artist to get a composite sketch of who she saw, which I guess is something they don't always do, especially when it has to do with like a child, and especially so soon after the victim had been victimized, right? But they decided they were going to make an exception and they were going to do this. But this didn't actually end up happening as far as I know, because the same day that the police sketch was okayed, like we're going to let Michaela, this traumatized child, do this sketch, police got their first break. So here's what happened. On the day that this all went down, there was a memorial held for Lauren at the place that she was killed. And there were a bunch of people there. And of these people was a couple. And this was a couple from out of town. So they drove like, I think 30 minutes over. And when they got there, there were a lot of people. So they decided to sit in their car to watch the memorial service and all that. So they're sitting in their car when all of a sudden a gold SUV drives by. And it's driven by a young white male with like shaggy hair. They see it. It drives by, kind of, goes slow. It stops. The person, not the car, looks and then leaves. Now, this couple immediately felt a little weird. Their spidey senses went off because they're like, I know that police are looking for a gold vehicle. So they decided to leave the memorial and follow this vehicle. All stealth-like. They drove behind him. They followed him to an apartment building. So they parked. They watch him get out of the vehicle, look nervous, go to the passenger side of the vehicle, grab what looked to be a rifle, like a long rifle wrapped in a blanket, and then go inside an apartment where they were parked. I can only imagine being this couple. Like, truly, think about that for a second. Think about being this couple. Think about seeing this vehicle, seeing this guy, and being like, I wonder if that is something. Then you follow him, and you see him get out with what looks like a gun. I would have been shitting my actual pants. And just the things that have to go right for this to happen. Like, what if they didn't follow him? What if they hadn't been in their car? What if they hadn't even been there that day? They didn't live there. All of these things had to go exactly right for this to happen. And Lauren's father, Vern, says that he believes that his daughter was intervening here. This was divine intervention. He said that he has felt her presence guiding him and guiding the case every step of the way, and that her intervention, I guess, I can't think of another word, her involvement, she made it so that Cody was caught, and that this whole thing was divine. He said that he had been praying to his daughter to come to help him and to support him, but he realized that he didn't need to, that she had always been there helping to keep him strong. So anyways, back to that day. This couple follows this guy. He goes inside with this gun. She calls the 911. She's like, yo, listen to this shit. Direct quote, obviously. So she calls. They're like, oh, well, take down the license plate number because that's very important. And she's like, don't worry, I already got you, dude. I did that. And it's a good thing that she did, because the guy that had gone inside shortly thereafter comes out without the rifle-like object and left. 911, at hearing this, puts out a call over the, radio saying, hey, any cops in this area, this is what we're on the lookout for, gold SUV, this guy's driving it, it was here at this time, etc, etc. And an officer in the area was like, I got this, saw the car, followed the car, the SUV, and a chase ensued. Well, not really a chase. It was more like he got behind the vehicle and then they both came to a reasonably timed stop. So the officer approaches the driver's side window and he sees that the guy inside is holding the steering wheel with both hands so tight that his arm's like twitching, okay? And he's like, oh, so this guy's obviously hella nervous. So they get him out of the vehicle and they ask him, like, do you mind if we search it? And he's like, no, that's fine. That's because he had already cleaned out the vehicle. Spoiler alert, but he didn't do a good job, because in searching the vehicle, they found a brass shell casing of like a bullet, right? That matched the gun it matched the bullets that were shot at Lauren, okay? And on top of that, when they searched his backpack, they found a pair of brass knuckles, and those are or were illegal to have. I know that they are/were illegal in some states, right, at different times, and at this state, or in this state, at this time, they were illegal. So he was arrested, and he was put into the back of the police car, and there is like body cam footage, dash cam footage, all that, and when it's being put in the car, he's like, oh Jesus, please forgive me. So initially he was arrested on charges related to the brass knuckles that he had in his possession, as well as charges related to child P-word, because of some stuff that they found in some devices that he had at the time that he was arrested. But while he was in custody, which, like, fuck this guy, first off. Well, fuck him for a lot of reasons, but that's a big one. But anyways, on top of that, once they had him in custody and they started talking to him, he ended up being given an additional few counts based on the confession that he gave, which we're going to get into shortly. But these counts were as follows: aggravated assault and murder. I guess I didn't need to do like the as follows because it wasn't like a long list, but he was then brought up on aggravated assault and murder charges based on the confession he gave. So this guy, this elusive shooter of this little girl, was 20-year-old Cody Lott. Now Cody, he was a bit of a loner. I said that weird. Loner. He was a bit of a loner. He was totally unknown to Lauren. He was 20 years old. She was 13 years old. It makes total sense that they would not know each other and should not know each other because that's not appropriate, but whatever. At the time of the murder, he lived with his grandmother, but his mother and stepfather lived right by Lauren's school. Now, Cody, he didn't have a good employment record. He had issues and a history of issues with drugs and had a record of arrests related to possession of said drugs. And he had his fair share of mental health issues. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder in 2015, which is a combination of schizophrenia and affective disorder. And after his arrest, his charges, his confessions, his father said that they don't know this version of Cody. He knows that after he and Cody's mom divorced, that Cody started to change, for sure. And by the time he was a teenager, he was going down a less than ideal path, doing drugs, having violent and aggressive outbursts. And he started declining mentally and actually even ended up being hospitalized after a standoff with police where he held his grandma hostage with a gun. I guess that day police got a call that he was there was a standoff, he had people inside, he was threatening people with a gun, so police came in and a negotiator had to speak to him to get him to come out of the house. And luckily in this situation, no one was hurt physically, and after this, he was sent to a mental health facility where he was diagnosed with the previously mentioned, conditions, but that's all that happened, right? There weren't serious legal repercussions, he was just given a criminal trespass warning and sent along his way. So Cody, this is the guy. He's taken in to be questioned by police, and he denies everything. He's talking voluntarily. He's like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you. But he denies everything, even when they're like, but we found a bullet in your car. He was like, listen, I don't even know how to shoot a gun. It probably belongs to my stepbrother, which is a dick move. Maybe he hated his stepbrother. I don't really know the relationship there. But within 45 minutes, they got him to start speaking honestly. And this is, honestly. And this is when he confessed, dude. He said he had seen Lauren before. He said he had driven by her many times prior to the murder, and on one of these occasions, the two made eye contact, and it was in that moment that he became obsessed with her. And he said of this quote, "Her eyes looked like gems or something to me." He said he could not understand how a person could have such beautiful eyes. He said that time he wasn't weird or anything, but he did drive by her and he did say, "What's up?" He said it wasn't weird or anything, but at the same time, he said in that moment, he decided he wasn't going to let anyone else, quote, enjoy that. Which is so disgusting. This is a literal child. But based on, the other charges that he had based on the things that were found in his electronics, that may be exactly what he was into. He said that he watched her. He would hang out in his, mother and stepfather's apartment that was near the high school and just watch her through the window, and he stalked her. He would follow her for a year. He learned her routine. He knew where she walked, how she got to school, how she got from school, where she lived. He literally followed her for a year. He knew she had a boyfriend, all of this. But until the murder, he didn't have access to a gun. But then, his mother and stepfather were out of town, so he knew he could get into their home and steal a gun without them knowing. So he did. He went into their apartment, he took a gun from their gun cabinet, gun safe, wherever it was. It was a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, and he drove to where he knew Lauren would be. He said the day of the murder, he pulled up next to them with the driver's side window facing them, and he just looked at Lauren. And he said the two of them made eye contact, and she sort of smirked at him whatever. He called it a condescending sort of smirk. And in that moment, he decided he was going to kill her. He said he felt himself change. He lifted the gun, he aimed it at Lauren, and he fired at her first. He said that Lauren was the only target, that he didn't want to hit Michaela, that he was actively actually trying to avoid hitting Michaela because she was black and he didn't want to go down that road, whatever that means, but that since they were right next to each other, Michaela was next to Lauren, she ended up getting hit too. He said based on watching Lauren so much, he knew that usually she'd be walking down that road alone, so he was only expecting her, so he definitely wasn't going to do it, which I don't know. I don't know if I think that's true, because later he did say that if he had more bullets, he would have killed Michaela, like if he could have, and the prosecution seems to think that this could have been racially motivated, that he was upset that this little white girl was friends with a black girl, which, like, you know how I feel about that. It's absolutely disgusting, and just, he's an awful person, right? There's so many things about him that are awful. And I don't know, he says like, oh, if I had enough bullets, but he did have like 30 rounds and he unloaded them all. And he said of doing this, quote, I was just pulling the trigger as fast as I could. It sounded like this. And then he made like gunshot sounds. And then he said, and I shot at Lauren and I didn't know if I'd hit her, and I saw her friend standing there looking at me, and I pointed the gun at her and I gave her a couple. Now, that day when Cody first stopped in the alleyway, all of the kids kind of stopped, and the kids that weren't Michaela and Lauren thought that perhaps this person was there to pick up Michaela and Lauren, because it was so weird for somebody to stop where he had stopped. And then once a gun was pulled out, they thought that it was like a BB gun, like a teenager fucking with some other teenagers, because kids are like dumb. But then when Lauren fell and the other girl started to run, when Michaela ran, that's when all the kids like scattered and screamed, went into like nearby yards and started calling their parents for help. He aimed at Lauren, and dude, he said he shot over and over as fast as he could. He said he was shooting so fast that he thought that the gun would jam, but that it didn't. And he shot her 15 times, and 2 of these shots were to this girl's head. And he said that he initially thought he would just shoot her once and that she would die instantly, and that would be that. But that he heard her screaming and crying, so he shot her again to put her out of her misery. And man, as he described the shooting, he described it like he was playing a video game. He was very like animated and excited, and he seemed proud of what he did. And he said that after he had done this, immediately after driving away, he lit up a joint. He told detectives that he had an issue with the media and everyone calling this a senseless killing. He said it wasn't a senseless killing, it was an assassination, a cold and calculated assassination that he had planned with the devil, and that he had done this because he wanted some people to experience a little bit of pain. He said if you were to ask anyone who knew him, they would not be surprised that he did what he did, because he was known to have hate in his heart. But in the same interrogation, whatever, he also said that he believed that Lauren was a beautiful angel who could not die and would instead be sent to another dimension. He said he was mad. He was upset. He was jealous that Lauren had gotten this new little punk boyfriend, because this boy who was like 13, by the way, I saw photos of him, he's a child, wasn't a man. Okay, he said that he was upset that he could lose his girl to this little shit kid, because he always wanted a girl. He always wanted a girl just like Lauren. He even said, quote, I wanted a girl like the girl I killed. He had literally never met this child, did not know her. They weren't friends on social media or anything. He was a complete stranger to her. He said in life, girls were constantly ignoring him, rejecting him, and he just wanted the opportunity to treat a girl right, like they deserve to be treated, which is ironic because one of his ex-girlfriends reported that he was incredibly abusive physically and mentally for years, even after they broke up, and said that he had threatened he was a stalker, and that he had threatened to kill her and her family. So he had this ex-girlfriend named Haley. The two had dated for 2 years, and I guess the first year was like fine, nothing notable, but the second year he was very abusive. He pushed her down the stairs. He took a seatbelt and like tried to strangle her with it. Okay, he was incredibly abusive. And then even after they broke up, he was obsessed. Like, she moved on, she got engaged, she had a baby, and he continued to stalk and terrorize her. He told her that he was going to find them, he was going to make them crash their car, and if they survived, he was going to torture them before killing them. He said that he was going to torture her baby son in front of her and then kill her, but make her watch first. And she said of him, quote, his entire life, he wanted to hurt people. His life goal was to hurt people. But you know, that's not what Cody says. He says that he wasn't shooting Lauren to hurt her. No. He wanted to save her. He said he knew Lauren was going to grow up, get drugged, and get assaulted in a few years. And so in killing her, he was saving her from the evils of this world. But at the same time, he said that her death was a sacrifice to the devil, that he had been talking to the devil. The devil told him to do this, and in doing this, he thought the devil would give him a mansion and a bunch of drugs. He said after the murder, he fled the scene. He got on the highway and he drove to this area that he knew that had like tall grass where he could hide the gun in a place that he could retrieve it later, because he does, and that's when he got seen by the witnesses that called the cops on him. So he goes, he ditches the gun, and then he drives to go and meet up with a girl to do drugs who lived in this city called Archer City, I believe, that was like 20 miles or 20 minutes. Those could be the same thing, but probably aren't. I think like 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. In Archer City, to establish an alibi. He then waited till Sunday, and then he drove back to the area and retrieved the gun so that he could put it back in his stepdad's gun container, gun holder, the place where he keeps his guns, so that they wouldn't suspect that he was related to this. He said it was all fun and games for him until he realized that a description of his vehicle and his likeness was released to the media. To which I have a question to Cody directly. Cody, Mr. Lot, asshole Lot, a question. Did you not think that your description was going to get out? You literally parked in front of a group of people in broad daylight and opened fire. Like, what did you expect to happen here, bro? But yeah, anyway, within 4 hours, he had given his confession, he was arrested, and the new charges were added. Now, Lauren's parents were reasonably shocked when they learned of all of this information, who he was, why he did it, etc., etc., and they were just like, yeah, like her mom was like, yeah, I definitely wouldn't have let this 20-year-old man near my 13-year-old daughter. Like, what the hell? Like, who would? And her father, Vern, was like, listen, I've seen this guy. He looks like a little baby back bitch. Not his words, but basically said that. Like, he's like, my daughter could have kicked this guy's ass if he didn't come at her with a gun. But he didn't. He came at her with a gun, and now he had been arrested, and he was pleading not guilty to the murder, and his attorneys were going to try to say that he was not mentally sound at the time he committed the murder, so he was not legally responsible for the murder. Because of Cody's prior mental health issues and that they were documented and all that jazz, the prosecution knew that they needed to take extra care in showing that Cody knew what he was doing was wrong when he did it, and so he wouldn't like to try to claim that he was delusional, since, you know, his condition could come with delusions, you know, in some people. So they needed to prove that he knew what he did was wrong, and that's why he tried to hide that he did it. Like, he hid the gun, you know, covered it with a blanket, drove and put it in a place, and then went back to get it later. He also, on the way to driving to shoot at Lauren, put the safety on to make sure he didn't hurt himself. Now, it did take a couple of years for trial to begin for a multitude of reasons. One was that there was a change of venue due to the publicity of the case, and also because Cody was actually deemed to not be competent to stand trial, so he had to be sent to a mental health care facility to be brought to competency, which, being competent to stand trial, I think we all know, is not the same thing as being mentally or legally responsible for the crime you committed, and it doesn't say anything about where your mindset was at the time that you committed the crime. I think we all know that, but in case we don't, two different things. But he was brought back up to competency, and the trial did begin. And once it began, Cody seemed very disconnected. He didn't really say much. He wasn't very interactive with his attorneys. He just sat there and looked super angry, to be honest. I've seen photos. He looks a little scary. Small and like I could take him, but scary. And that was until he was sent to the mental health facility to be brought up to competency. Up to competency? To become competent? Yeah. Vern, Lauren's father, said that when he came back from that, he seemed different. That to look at him, he looked different. He looked like a scared little boy. And he said, but despite himself, he found himself feeling bad for his daughter's killer. But that was until the testimony began. The trial began with people testifying who had been there that day. The children who had been there that day went up there to testify about what they saw and the trauma that they had experienced because of Cody Lott. One of the kids that testified, and one that I think was the most powerful during the trial, was testimony of Michaela. And it was a very emotional time and a very emotional day for her. It was hard to do. I think her testimony was so impactful because this is a little girl who was shot in the chest, who still has a bullet in her chest because it would be too risky to remove, who still thinks about it whenever the wire of her bra rubs against her scar and hurts her, whose best friend was killed in this attack. She said she remembered seeing him. She said she remembers making eye contact with him, seeing him raise the gun, seeing him aim it at her, and then him just shooting her in the chest. She said at that moment she motioned for her friends to run, and at first they weren't even sure that she was serious, but then they did, and they ran. And then she heard shots over and over, and once the shots had stopped, that's when she could assess the situation and realize that Lauren wasn't with her. She said that she tried to walk back to Lauren, but she realized she couldn't anymore. She couldn't breathe, so she collapsed by some dumpsters, and she felt the blood running from her chest and down onto her stomach. She said that she looked around and she saw legs, and these were Lauren's legs, and that she called out to her, but Lauren didn't respond. So she took out her phone and she called her mother. Oh my God. Her mom, who drove right over to see a pair of little feet lying on the ground, and she thought these were her daughter's feet because she knew her daughter had been shot. But they weren't. They were Lauren's. But this didn't stop this woman from just collapsing into a puddle of a mother, you know? So Michaela said she was sitting there, she was bleeding, and that's when a man named John hopped over a fence to try to help the kids and told her to sit there, to not move, and to wait for paramedics to arrive. He testified that he had been in the backyard getting things ready for his own daughter's birthday party that day when he started hearing the shots. And he said because of his military background, he knew the sound to be the shots of a semi-automatic rifle. So he quickly stopped everything and hopped his 6-foot fence. He said he just went into total tunnel vision mode. He said that when he got over the fence, he saw Lauren. And when he looked in her face, he saw what he recognized as the death stare. As in that she was gone and there was no movement in her eyes. It was then that he realized, okay, she's gone, but I need to help Michaela. So he asked his own daughter to go get him something to, quote, plug up her holes. And then he sat there reassuring her, telling her she was a champ, telling her she was going to be okay, and asking her if she believed in God. He testified that this whole thing was so traumatizing to him that he's planning to move. I don't know if he did because this was years ago, but he was planning to move out of his home because everything in his house and in his life was a constant reminder of the trauma of that day. It was just so sad, man. I watched the testimony and everybody who testified at this trial had such a hard time keeping it together. There was one woman who said that she got there and she said she just felt so bad for Lauren because she was laying there exposed and her eyes were open. She was still holding her school binder that had bullet holes in it and a copy of Stephen King's book, Christine, that also had bullet holes in it. And she also had a very obvious head wound, so she got a blanket to cover her. And she said of this moment, quote, "There were so many people and all of them were just staring at her. I felt bad for her." The day that they went over the autopsy, Lauren and Michaela's families, their parents, left the courtroom. The only person I know of for sure that stayed was Lauren's grandfather, and he made a special point not to look up when they were showing photos, which all of it, them not being there, him not wanting to look up, I can understand because the photos and the details, they told the court that she was shot at a distance of 3 feet and that she was hit twice in the head, as well as being shot in both hands, her chest, her liver was hit, her spinal column, and her shoulders, just to name a few places. And the fatal shots were a bullet to her liver, her left lung, and one that hit her brainstem, which is already so horrible. And then I picture the photos that they showed because she was so little, and I know that she had these marks and abrasions all over her face from when she fell face down in the gravel. And then, man, they showed photos of the clothes she wore to school that day and her jewelry, her ring that she wore, this little chain with a charm and earrings. And they also showed photos of bullet fragments that still had what looked to be blood and hair on them. And when all of this was passed around, when all these photos were passed around, they also had to pass around a box of tissues. Now, we're going to talk about the defense. And I mean, they did what they could. That is their job, right? The defense brought up a psychiatrist named Brian who was there to testify to Cody's deteriorating mental state. They said that Cody's reasons for murdering Lauren ranged from him just wanting the thrill of it to the fact that he hated women, he wanted attention, and he wanted to save children by killing children because that would make God, wake up and look around, which is, I'm sorry, stupid. And the psychiatrist also said that Cody had killed Lauren because he was jealous. He was jealous she had gotten a boyfriend. And to me personally, that seems like the most consistent and reasonable, not reasonable, the most likely reason why he did what he did. But again, that's just my opinion. The defense basically just tried to paint the picture of a troubled young man suffering from a major psychotic disorder who was self-medicating because of the fact that he had a ton of opioids in his system at the time of the murder and had lit a joint directly after committing it. He said that Cody was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. He lost touch with reality and had visual and auditory hallucinations, and disordered thinking, and said of this quote, "It's my opinion that Mr. Lott did not know the wrongfulness of his conduct." But the DA chewed this guy up and spit him out. It was actually very tense and awkward. And just for the record, the prosecution had their own expert psychologist, I think, actually, who interviewed Cody and determined that yes, he did suffer from these mental health conditions, absolutely. But that did not mean that he didn't know right from wrong at the time that he committed this murder. The psychologist, his name was Dr. Davis, I believe, said that he had never worked a case where there were more instances and more evidence that the person who committed the murder knew right from wrong at the time they committed it. And I mean, the jury got to see his confession. So they got to see him admitting things. They got to hear him admitting these things from his own mouth with his own words, showing that he knew right from wrong. And if all of that wasn't enough, the jury was also shown, or they heard rather, I think both, but it was the dash cam footage from the day Lauren was killed at the site, where you can hear Lauren's mother's screams. And I think playing this last was a strategic move because it was incredibly powerful and impactful, and it was the last thing they heard before going into deliberations, and there was not a dry eye in the house. And I will tell you that I accidentally heard this. One thing about me, I've mentioned this before, I think, maybe I haven't, but I tend not to, there's two things that I try to avoid, and it is, well, not avoid always. I'll read transcripts of 911 calls, and I'll read transcripts of victim impact statements, but I try not to often hear them because I just know where my line is and what I can handle as a human being, which is less since being a mother. I will tell you that. I've gotten a lot softer. It's hard not to let these things seep into you, and to hear this woman, I will tell you, it's incredibly impactful. Before the jury left to start their deliberations, the prosecution said of Cody Lott, quote, "He's violent, he's vicious, and he is a predator." Within 1 hour, the jury had come back with their verdict, and they had found Cody Lott to be guilty. He was guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault, and murder. He was given the maximum sentence allowed. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder and an additional 20 years for the aggravated assault. He also has to pay fines totaling $20,000 and was given credit for his 750 days served. And the DA said of his sentence, quote, "I hope he rots in prison." Now, I said that Cody was given life in prison, but apparently life in prison is only 60 years. Did you know that? Because I didn't know that. And neither did Lauren's parents, and they were not happy about this. They said that they didn't see this as justice because in just 30 years, he will be eligible for parole. After the verdict was read, Michaela's parents, this was Rodney and Shamika, they went into the hallway and they called their daughter to give her the news because she wasn't there that day. And they wanted to make sure she got the news from them and not from like the news or something like that. And she was very excited to hear this. She was so happy to hear that he had been found guilty. And this was very important for her. It was important for her family because they had too been through so much. Michaela had lasting mental struggles because of what she experienced that day. She wasn't able to walk to school anymore, not even to and from the bus stop. And she had to like call her friends every day. She needed to make sure she talked to them and make sure that she could tell them that she loved them because she never got to do this with Lauren. And it wasn't just Michaela. Her mother, Shamika, had lasting anxiety from this moment in her life as well because like especially for the first year after, because every time her phone would ring, if her daughter's photo was there, she would panic. You know, she'd go into a panic state, wondering what that call could be for. Which, man, I totally get. That situation would fundamentally change you to your core. To know that your child, your baby, was a victim of a violent crime. To know that sort of unprovoked evil and violence is just out there and it could happen to anyone at any time, even a 13-year-old girl, is so terrifying. And then to sit and look at Lauren's family and to see what they were going through and to know that could have so easily also been you. And speaking of Lauren's parents, her family, Lauren's father Vern gave a victim impact statement, which I actually did watch. I said that I don't always watch them, I read them, but I did watch his. And I honestly want to read you the entire thing, but it is incredibly lengthy, so I will not. I will pick and choose some points to read to you, but it's just this family lost so much, and to hear him talk about it and to hear him talk specifically directly to Cody is incredibly heartbreaking. When he stood to give his victim impact statement, he realized that Cody wasn't looking at him, so he stopped and he was like, you, like, look at me, like, when I'm telling you this. And then he told him that in all the things, because he heard Cody's confession, he's like, in all the things you said in your confession, you only got 2 things right. And those things were that my daughter was beautiful and she was an angel, because you're right, she really was those things. He then said that when Cody went to his competency, like when Cody went to get his competency, his mental health in a state where he could be competent to stand trial, and he came back, he looked like a sad, scared little boy. And that despite what he felt like he should feel, he felt pity for him. He felt bad for the guy who murdered his child. He said that he felt like it must be so hard to be so empty and sad and have nothing good inside of you, and that he felt ashamed for feeling guilty for you. For him, for Cody. He felt ashamed for feeling guilty for Cody. And he said he felt so ashamed about this that he hid it from his wife, and he only found out, like, recently, not recently now, but recent before the victim impact statement and before the trial, that Bianca felt the same way. She also felt bad for Cody. So they both had this shame and this guilt inside of them for feeling bad for him. And then they hear from, the doctors and people who interacted with him that Cody, even though he had gone and become competent to stand trial, had no remorse. He didn't show feeling bad at all. And I believe even to this day, he has never apologized to either family. So they felt bad for this guy. Come to find out that this guy didn't even feel bad about what he did. Vern then said to him, quote, "The choices that you made, you're going to suffer the consequences now. What you're going to know, fear, pain, humiliation for what you've done." And the ironic thing about that, if Lauren had known you and known the pain you had inside of you, and you had been able to reach out like a human being, that this is a good person I see. This is somebody, a light, that I see a goodness. If you had reached out to her and let her know how empty and hateful you felt inside, Lauren would have been the first one to try and help you. And throughout his lengthy statement, several times throughout his lengthy statement, he had to stop because he realized that Cody wasn't looking at him, and he stopped to tell him to look at him. And the composure this man had, like, it wasn't, I'm sure it was angry, but it wasn't like aggressive. It wasn't hateful. It was just calm. And he was like, "Hey, please look at me. Like, when I'm saying this to you, you need to look at me." And Vern, man, there is something, like, I am thoroughly impressed with him as a human being. He's been very vocal, like he was at least very vocal during the trial. He has been vocal since, and to hear him talk, like to hear him speak, you can understand how Lauren turned into such an amazing person. His, like, thoughtfulness in what he says, his recognition of the fact that he wants to try his hardest to practice what he taught his daughter and be a good person and see good in all people, even attempting to see how hard Cody must have it living with what he did. And the fact that one of his biggest takeaways was the fact that the kids who testified at trial, who lost their innocence that day, were so strong and so brave. These were the things that he was caring about during his daughter's murder trial. He also, by the way, made a point to reach out to Cody's family. He said he doesn't blame them for what their son did, and he recognizes that they too are in grief, that they also lost a child, and then they're not receiving a fraction of the support that his family was getting. So he asked the public to keep them in their minds as well, which, that's big of him, man. That's not something that everyone would or could do, but he did. And him and Bianca go on to do even more than that, which I'm talking a lot about Vern, but he was just the one who was more vocal, more, I imagine, able to, like, speak without being, broken down, because I believe that Lauren was great, not just because of her father, but her mother as well. I just don't have as many, like, quotes and references from her specifically. Which, honestly, I don't think I would be big and strong enough to speak out after my child was killed. Like, I completely get it, but I just don't want you to be like, you're only focusing on Vern. What about Bianca? I'm sure that Bianca's fantastic, too. I didn't get anything but just warmth from her. And the two of them are just so great, like, as a power couple together. Like, for example, on a smaller scale, Lauren's friends still want to go over to her house and have sleepovers in her room, which without getting too personal, because I don't want to, and I'm not like the type, this got to me a bit, because after one of my friends died, me and my friends did the same. We would still go to her house and spend the night at her house after she was gone. So to read about these girls doing that as well was very, it just, it humanizes an experience that should always feel humanized. And I was saying that, I got off on a thing, but that her parents allow them to do this. They allow them to come over and spend the night. And they said that at one point they were even considering moving, but they were like, how can we leave when they still want to do this? And I know they did. I don't know if they still do, but for a while, her friends would always go over on her birthday and spend the night at Vern and Bianca's house. And they'd remember her and they'd talk about her and, you know, just have a slumber party like she was still there. I wonder if they still do. I feel like it's the type of thing that as you get older, you do less. You know, from experience, I've seen that. But I know that they did do that. And I know one thing that was very sweet is that one of her friends said that she kept a diary, and that in this diary, she would write letters to Lauren. She'd be like, "Dear Lauren," and then write about her day like she was still talking to her. Now, another amazing thing her parents did that I was so like ready to tell you guys about is that after Cody got sentenced, they started working on something called Lauren's Law. They said of their decision to do this, quote, "We knew that we had to change that law, and we knew we could not do it ourselves. Helping others is how you heal." Which, man, helping others is how you heal? Like, that is what we need to put on a t-shirt. And they did, though. After her death, Lauren's Law was passed in Texas. Basically what it does is it changed the capital murder guidelines, because in Texas, a victim had to be under 10 years old when they were killed for the murder to be capital murder. And Lauren was 13, and because it was not capital murder, it was second-degree murder, and because of that, Cody Lott is eligible for parole one day. Now, because of Lauren's Law, if you are found guilty of murdering a child between the ages of 10 and 15, it is considered capital murder, and you will automatically be sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. And this law has already helped change the future for some very unfortunate, doesn't seem like the right word, but parents who have lost children. And one case that I can highlight today that this, that Lauren's Law had an effect on was the case of Logan Klein. Logan Klein was an 11-year-old boy whose body was found in an abandoned car down the street from a motel in February of 2020. His mother, Stormy Johnson, and her boyfriend, Corey Trumbull, were arrested for this horrific torture murder. And Logan, he was 11 at the time of his murder. So thanks to Lauren's Law, convicted criminals are automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole. And that applied to Corey Trumbull. And it took a jury less than, 16 minutes to find this man guilty of this child's murder. As far as Stormy, and just in case you're curious, we're not getting deep into this case, but as far as Stormy, this little boy's mother, she ended up pleading guilty and was given the maximum sentence allowed for her crime, which was murder and tampering with evidence. So she was given life in prison plus 20 years. Now, I gotta be honest, I couldn't really look into the details of Logan's case while researching Lauren's case. It was too much for me. To be very real, this case in general was very hard to cover. I don't know what it was, it really got into me. And I cried a couple of times when looking into this one, and I just couldn't bring myself to look into what happened to Logan. Even the few things I did read to find out about the case so I could tell you, this boy went through hell. And I read such surface level things, and I just can't believe it. But the point is that because of Lauren's Law, this monster, this sadist, because that is what Trumbull was, a sadist, is gone. We don't have to worry about him being on the street. And that's just a testament to the power of what Lauren's family brought into this world with Lauren's Law. Bianca and Vern said that with this law, they've addressed a hole in the law that needed help. They said this is to ensure no one in their shoes has to go through what they went through, and to know that their child's killer could be paroled one day. And Bianca says she believes her daughter would approve. Now, you would think that we're done talking about Cody Lott, but of course, like often happens in these cases, he did appeal. His attorneys tried to appeal on the basis that the verdict and sentence were contrary to the law and evidence. Basically, his attorneys say that any evidence found in the vehicle should have been excluded since they had no right to stop him. Because, I remember reading about this or learning about this in my criminal justice class in college, but basically, a police officer is not allowed to just stop you for no reason. That is not what they're supposed to do. If you're speeding, if you don't use your blinker, they can look for something small, but they have to have a reason to stop you. And the cop that stopped Cody said that he didn't have any reason to stop Cody except for the call that came in that said, hey, you should stop this car. And so Cody's attorneys were saying that since they had no reason to stop this car, that anything that was recovered from stopping this car shouldn't be admissible because of the fruit of the poisonous tree, etc., etc. Which actually, if you think about it, technically means that his arrest shouldn't have happened for the brass knuckles, since they shouldn't have been able to search his car, and therefore his confession shouldn't have been admissible. That's the point that they're trying to make. But there is a what is the word I'm looking for? Caveat? An exception here. And that is, if reasonable suspicion exists that the person that you're pulling over has or will soon commit a crime, you can pull them over, basically. Oh, speaking of his confession though, because that was another point in the appeal. They also said that his confession should have been suppressed because he did not knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily waive his privilege against self-incrimination. But he did agree to talk and also signed papers that he had been Mirandized and all that jazz. So that's kind of like a dumb point in my opinion. I guess they're saying because he wasn't mentally well, but he was proven to not, that wasn't the case. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. There was more to the appeal also, like him being upset about victim impact testimony being used. He thought that like it shouldn't have been able to be given in front of the jury. And there was also one thing that was a bit interesting. Not that Cody Lott's interesting because he's one of the least interesting people I've ever read about, but just the legal part of this was interesting to me. And that was that he was saying that because he was claiming to be not legally responsible because of a mental defect, the court ordered that he be seen by a psychiatrist for the state. And he was saying that by forcing him to see a psychiatrist for the state, they were violating his rights to not self-incriminate, which was an interesting point because they actually didn't have any cases. You know, if you've ever read an appeal, they reference other cases. How it works. I'm trying to remember how to like say this properly from when I worked at the law firm, but basically when deciding how to rule on a case, you look at past cases for a precedent that has been set. And there was no precedent set when it came to that particular argument. It was a unique argument, which I was giving Cody the credit for the argument, like saying he said this, but it was his attorneys that they found this. And I just found that to be an interesting read. But despite all of that, his appeal was denied. His attorneys did ask for a review saying that he was convicted based on inadmissible evidence, etc, etc. But again, the Court of Appeals was like, nah dog, you're in jail. And I believe his opportunities for appeal were exhausted in 2020. And man, Lauren's family was so happy to hear that the appeal was denied. And now he can sit in prison where he belongs, at least until 2046 when he's up for parole. And that at least for now, it's over for them. Lauren's father says, as human beings, we are failing all of our tests, that we are horrible to each other and that horrible things happen every single day, but that somehow, despite all that, Lauren was not like that. And he said of his daughter, and I quote, "We have the amazing legacy that Lauren left behind of kindness, helping other people. That's always been our beliefs as well. But we realize that had Lauren lived, if Lauren was alive, she would spend her life trying to help others somehow, some way. We didn't know how, but we felt a responsibility to continue that legacy, to continue the things we taught her, and to try to spread that as much as we can." And so my hope is that in telling you about Lauren and about her wonderful family, I have somehow shared that message. And with that, my friends, is the story of the senseless murder of 13-year-old Lauren Landavaso. I hope that you found my telling of this to be, informative. I hope it made sense. And I just want to thank you for remembering Lauren with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, the two questions, and these were them. That's not a good sentence, but these are the questions. 1, do you think that Cody received the right sentence? Do you think this guy should have the possibility of parole, or do you think he should have been locked up for life, no possibility regardless? And 2, what do you think was the real reason for why he did what he did? Which of his many excuses do you think was the true reason he murdered Lauren? Because I just don't get it. I don't get that mindset. I'm glad I don't. I'm glad that my mindset is so far removed from that, but I just want to know what you guys think. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with any case suggestion you have, any case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I do love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.